Alrighty, so I am super excited about this next interview that we're going to do. And I'm just gonna let Karmen go ahead and introduce herself. So take it away, Karmen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Karmen. So I was born and raised in San Francisco, specifically the Richmond district. I went to basically all the schools in the Richmond district from Alamo, Presidio, Washington High School, where I met Eric. And for college, I stuck around in the Bay Area and went from Foothill to Skyline to CSM. I was just basically everywhere. And yeah, that's a little intro about me.
Bay Area girl through and through, San Francisco girl through and through. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with me. I think you bring a few very unique perspectives to our world and everything that's going on right now, and definitely to our community. I wanted to ask you, so you introduced yourself and kind of like what you like, kind of where you come from. Would you mind like telling us a little bit about your experiences, or not so much maybe your experiences, but growing up in the Bay Area, maybe some of the things that you have seen and how, because you also stuck around, and how things have changed past, like really the past 10 years is I think when the biggest change happened in our lifetimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my younger years, to be honest, I don't know if it's like a really big change or it's the fact that like we grew up and started seeing more for ourselves and what our parents kind of didn't want us to see. But there is like, I mean, from the last couple months, I see like a lot of divide in a lot of communities. And I mean, before, I mean, not that it wasn't happening, but it just wasn't so visible, if that makes sense. But I also feel like because back in the day, you know, social media wasn't such a big platform. Now that it is, and everybody's on their phone all the time, we get to see it as like a day-to-day basis, like with all these news that we see, sometimes not even on the news channel, but more on social media, and then it blows up, and then it becomes on the news. I feel like social media has a lot to do with that. But in my younger days, what kind of experience are you referring to? Like just like growing up in the Richmond district, or like?
Well, let's work off of what you just said. So you said that you've seen a lot of divide between communities, and I think that people get this perspective, or they get this perception, I should say, that San Francisco is this huge, melting pot. Whereas I've always thought about it as like, it's actually kind of segregated. Like everyone kind of has their own spot in the city, all the communities do. And then with what's happened, I think that a lot of people have been pushed out of their communities, and it like caused rifts between, I think, the people that are at, not at war, but, that they're not getting along. I don't even think that they're necessarily the ones who need to be getting mad at each other. But if you wouldn't mind, you brought together two communities in your marriage. And in the family that you're raising. Would you mind speaking a little bit about that, and then kind of just go from there, so however much you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah. So I'm married to a half Guatemalan, half Black man. And we have a beautiful 3-year-old daughter. So I'm Chinese, Vietnamese, and Thai mixed. And so my husband is Guatemalan and Black. So she's mixed with 5 races. Coming from, so I'm more Well, my mom, she's like, traditional Chinese. She's from Hong Kong, and my dad's from Thailand, but he's more Americanized than my mom. So my family on my mom's side, they're very traditional, and um, they are very, as you would say, old fashioned. So when I first started dating my husband, it was just kind of like a big culture shock for them. Um, but I mean, it took them to get used to knowing him, um, and to knowing like what person he is for them to be a little bit more comfortable. Um, but like, I mean, like now where you hear like, yes, I mean, I'm gonna say it like, yes, there are a lot of Asian families are not, I think the correct word is more ignorant towards different races, because some of my family members are. I know that they don't really mean to be, you know, like racist towards a race, but they do, like, they don't have the like correct education. And when they were born, it was just like one thing where it's like, okay, like, one person does one bad thing, and then so they blame the entire like race. And so it's just a lot like a lack of education. um and so it definitely has been a little hard, because they do sometimes make comments. For example, my daughter, she's a brown girl, and sometimes like in the summer, like we go out and then she like comes back even more brown. um and so like, well, sometimes my family be like, oh my god, like where'd you go, like you're so dark now. And I'm just like, what? Like, and me being me, I like always have something to say. And would be like, oh yeah, like that's her skin tone, she's brown, like that's who she is. But they don't really get that. And we've had conversations about, especially everything that's happened now, and they're just like, you see, like this is why we say the things we say, because like it's, usually it's this race doing this. And my part in that whole thing is that I am trying my best to educate them, because obviously they don't have the greatest education in that. And it's hard for them to have an open mind, because they're so set on like the past times. um so yeah, that's work that needs to be done. And I feel like I'm not the only Asian American that's doing that, because a lot of Asian families are going through the same thing, where they're just like, oh yeah, it's always, da da da. But they don't really have an open mind to like not blaming an entire community for one person's thing. Like if it was one person, that person who did a crime, then that person is a criminal. It's not like, oh yeah, the entire race is freaking, criminals. That just doesn't make sense. um and yeah, with my daughter, I mean, I grew up in a very diverse school. um and like, I've never really, I never really stuck with a certain group. I had a lot of friends in different races. Like, I've never really was like, I'm not going to be friends with you because you're a different race than me, basically. And the way I grew up, that's how I want my daughter to grow up. So she's currently in preschool in a pretty diverse school. And that's what I would love for her to grow up in, is to be diverse, to see everybody, and definitely know her roots. And yeah, I think that's pretty important growing up.
Absolutely. And thank you for being so open and sharing about, I can only imagine the place you're in, as kind of
Yeah.
that like in between place. I want to ask you, so back in the summer, last summer, after George Floyd, we kind of had this like moment of racial reckoning.
Mhm.
And then now we are in the middle of February. And just to give a little bit of context, there has been a rise of violent crime against Asian American elders
Mhm.
specifically.
Mhm.
Um, Again, like you, I don't think necessarily that it's been necessarily a rise. It's just that it's finally getting recorded. I think
Mhm.
there has been a rise of crime in general.
Mhm.
I think that we can agree on that. Um, do you see? Well, I want to know how your communities responded to first what happened in at the end of May with George Floyd, and then kind of what's happening now. Like, was it like, 5 steps forward and 10 steps back? Was there
Mhm.
not, like, how did your communities handle those two?
So with the George Floyd thing, I saw a lot of my Asian American friends like speak up, go to protests, and we were very vocal about that because mm, that like was awful. Um, but you know, relating back to like my family who like they saw it on the news, they thought it was wrong, but they weren't vocal about it as much as we were. Um, and I mean, I know a lot of like I've seen a lot of Asian like other Asian communities. Like I'm not really I don't really know which ones, but I've seen a lot of like organizations that represent like Asian Americans from like SF Chinatown that was out there protesting, and there were a lot of um, uh, like I guess like organizations, but also like I think there were like community members that I've seen. They were out there with them also, but then a lot of other people I would love to see being vocal about the issue weren't vocal about the issue. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I did see a lot of Asians, but a lot of Asians also weren't vocal about the issue. And I feel like it's just like in our culture, we, if there's a problem, we're usually quiet about it. Like we were taught, like, oh, don't make a big fuss. Don't, just forget about it. Like just, keep it pushing. Like they've always taught us to like, not start a big problem if it's just be quiet and keep pushing, and that's just like a very Asian cultural thing, I feel like. um so yeah, I mean, it was kind of disappointing that a lot of people that I know weren't as vocal about it, but as like for example like this issue with Asian people getting attacked left and right, then they're vocal about it, and it's I think that's where the divide happens, is that like I mean it kind of goes both sides. It's like when one person's community is getting attacked, they focus more about their community, and if the other person's community is getting attacked, they don't, really care. And then it's like this big battle of like, oh yeah, you weren't there for me, but I was there for you, and it's just this circle, which I feel like is a big thing that we need to work on. Um, because I feel like that's what's causing the divide, is that people are like, oh, um, you have it worse than me, or you have it better than me, and that just doesn't go anywhere.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I think you definitely hit the nail on the forehead. And I always ask this of the Asian community members that I've interviewed.
Hmm.
How has this theory of the model minority, how has that impacted you? Well, first of all, what do you think about that? And what do you think that what do you think is the greater image that it portrays, or that it's the what does that do or doesn't do for your community?
I think so when like I hate that, like the model minority, because like that it's not as true as people would think it is. Um like so, like a lot of people see like, oh, Asians, and then they basically pair us with like the white community. Like, oh yeah, like, we're rich, we got money, we're making business and blah blah blah. Like, okay, yes, there are some Asian people that, are thriving off from the bat, but there are also other Asian people who aren't. Like, for example, like me, my parents, so my mom immigrated from Hong Kong when she was like 17. I think my dad was about the same age. And they immigrated from Thailand. From what they told me, my dad was, when they had me and my brother, my dad was working two jobs. Like one was like a security and one was like, I don't know, something else. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and just basically trying to raise us. They didn't have money to purchase like diapers for us. They were basically trying to like make ends meet, And so like we grew up, I mean, sometimes we didn't have enough money to have food. So like, like we would have to ask like my grandma for money sometimes. So it wasn't like super peachy for us. And then eventually, like my dad, he started his own business as a driver instructor, and that's when it started to get a little better. But I mean, he's still working, like till this day, he's still like working along a lot of hours. And like, I mean, his kids are all grown up now, so he doesn't really have to like worry about us too much, but he's still trying to make ends meet because in the Bay Area, it's so expensive. So that whole thing with the model minority thing, I think, in my opinion, is just ridiculous. Just because it's like I feel like a lot of people just think that what they see, is what is happening. Like if you were an outsider and you saw, for example, like my family now, you're probably like, oh yeah, they're thriving, they're doing so good, like da da, but they don't know the struggle behind it. And I feel like that's how a lot of people are. Like nobody knows the struggle, and all they see is just like, oh, that they're doing better now, but it's like they never really looked into like how they started. um but yeah, I think I don't like that. That we have to get like based off of, I mean, at the same time, that's where the whole thing where it's like the divide comes in, because it's like other races are like, oh yeah, you guys don't have to worry about nothing, you guys don't have to worry about, all this issues. But we each race has a lot of similarities that a lot of people don't see, until like somebody like me and you who have like conversation about like our struggles, and you're just like, wow, yeah, it's pretty same. And yeah.
Thank you so much for being so open about that. Because it's true. I think that that's something that's really divided the communities against each other, and it doesn't serve the Asian American community when the rest of the communities kind of put them up on this pedestal, separate from the rest of us, when you're right, so many of our struggles are similar. And if Asian Americans did indeed have it so well, then why don't we see more representation in government? Why don't we see more,
Right.
why
Like even in the movies and the TV, like you barely see the lead to be an Asian person, and it's already hard to even see the lead being a Black person or a Hispanic person. Like,
Right.
it's just, yeah, and yeah, it's just like we're all fighting to get to be known, basically, and to be, like we're all in the same fight
Totally.
at the end of the day. Yeah. That's,
Um, Shifting gears a little bit,
Mhm.
can you tell us about the project that you started? And I saw some really awesome news, but anyway, I'll let you say that.
So yeah, with everything that has been happening, I've literally been on social media, and literally every single day there has been a new thing about Asian Americans, especially the elderly, getting attacked. And it was just super draining for me. And one day I was just I texted in like a group chat with Tabia and some of our other friends. And I was just like, I'm just so sick of this. Like, this is so draining. And I felt really helpless. And they all felt the same way. And so I have my grandma, she's 97.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and she just turned 97 like a couple of days ago. And so she usually would always go downstairs by herself. She has no phone. She goes downstairs to get groceries, and she's usually by herself, but because of COVID, she hasn't been out anymore. But I've seen that video of that Thai grandpa, and I was just so sad because actually that neighborhood is kind of near where my grandma lives. So I was just like, that's crazy. Like that you could be walking in the street and then, something happens like that. And I just felt super helpless, and I wanted to do something, but I didn't know how. So, me talking with Tabia, we started a GoFundMe for pepper sprays / alarm systems to be passed around in Oakland Chinatown and SF Chinatown, and we want to expand it a little bit more because I feel like a lot of communities have a lot of elderlies like other places, and we do want to um, make sure that they are protected, give them information, because they probably don't know how to, like, one, report to the police, or like all that stuff, or and the news wasn't really covering anything until now. And so I just feel like we kind of have to take it into our own hands, and that's why we started the GoFundMe, and we met our goal a couple of days ago, which was really amazing. I was like, we were so happy that we got so much support. A lot of other organizations have reached out and was trying to help us, and said that, like, if we needed help with like distributing, that they are more than happy to do so. And yeah, it was really great.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
You're right. Like we got to take it into our own hands. And
Yeah.
you definitely did. You put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like I couldn't just keep sitting around and keep watching it and not do anything. I mean, like I just needed to do something, and the least I could do was just, this, or yeah. And with like my work schedule, I would not be able to patrol as much as I would love to, but yeah.
But you definitely did something, and
Yeah.
you created your own little ripple. Kind of that leading into my second to last question is, what would you like to see done? And like, so obviously you did something, and I have seen a lot more of a presence on social media. I've seen a lot more representation, specifically from Asian leaders speaking up and speaking out about these issues. I really like how it's not attacking another community. The message that I've seen anyway has been
Mhm.
very community oriented, like let's all get together. Um, what do you think has to be done, should be done at the structural level, stuff that's out of your control? And do you see any hope with this new administration, you know, one of the most diverse, I believe, that we've ever had?
Mhm.
And with the new leadership, like, sorry, that makes sense. Like, what do you think needs to be done? And do you see hope for that happening?
Um, Definitely, like, to start is to definitely have people know what's going on in our communities, because if it wasn't for social media, the news would not cover it, because of social media putting so much pressure onto the news, now it's starting to appear onto the news. So like, that's the first step, is for people to know what is happening. I do have hope in the new administration, because the last administration, he- to be honest, it was just, he was just starting something already by, calling coronavirus the Chinese virus, or like the Kung flu. Like, that's, it gave people like reasons to be like, oh yeah, like all Asian people have it, or like, it all started from them, so we should all blame them. But he also did a lot of other things to other communities, which is ridiculous. So yes, I do have hope for the new administration to at least do better. Um, yeah, and with our VP being a very diverse woman, I do see a lot of hope in putting diversity into politics, and understanding the struggle of each community.
Awesome. My last question. Thank you so much for being so open and for sharing and giving us, like I said, a very unique perspective that I think is very valuable and I think would bridge a lot of communities. So I thank
Mhm.
you so much for that. What's your final message for other Asian Americans, whether it be like towards, you know, Asian American females or Asian American elders or your community as a whole? What would you like to say?
Um, well, for Asian Americans, definitely stop being silent and start speaking out, and start protecting yourself, and not, brush it to the side or anything. It's like time to be vocal. And also to just stop pinning each other against each other. Like, we are definitely stronger together. So I just, like, the blaming an entire community, like, that has got to stop. And educating our elderlies of what to do when they do go out, and just to be careful. Um, and if they're able to work with other communities, and like, understand each other, instead of just understanding just one community. It's time to, like, have an open mind and hear the other communities out, so we can be stronger together. That's my message.
Thank you so much again, Carmen. You didn't say this, but I hope it's okay if I say it. Like, you are a nurse, you're an essential worker. So thank you so much for being out there on the front lines. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks.
On top of taking the time to do this interview, but I know you're super busy and I really appreciate it. And I know this is going to help a lot of people. So
Well, thank you for having me.
absolutely. Have a great rest of your day. And
Yeah.
maybe we'll have to do a round two.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.